Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Cthulhu in Comics. How did Cthulhu get there, and what are they doing? No, this is the Cthulhu Mythos in comic books, and we have today Gretchen Martin. What's your podcast again? Kaiju Cast?
I was on the Kaiju Cast.
Kaiju Cast, yeah. And David Fireball Heath, Pride of Estacada. David Heath from People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. And I am DB Spitzer, editor and producer and co-host of People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. And we're going to be talking about Cthulhu in comics today. Dave, do you want to start us off?
So, my personal experience is I didn't get into comics until after I graduated college, and I was bringing in my own money. But I had always been into Lovecraft since I was 13. I discovered our library had an Arkam, press, a copy of one of the books, and I would check it out of the library every 6 months. And when I was in college, I would get very stressed. We didn't understand self-care back then. So my self-care was I would go to the bookstore. And I would just sit there, and I didn't have money necessarily to buy books, but I would just sort of feel the books. And there at the B. Dalton bookstore in Oxnard, California on Savory Street was this rack of comics. And it was an Arkham story. And I was so excited because there was a Lovecraft comic book. And I opened it up, and it had this Batman in it. And so that was my first experience to comics with Lovecraft, or the lack of. And hopefully, DB will let me tell this story later on, but I actually from that point on, I was curious, why was there an Arkam Asylum? So I actually tracked down one of the people that created the term Arkam Asylum, or created Arkam Asylum for DC Comics.
And you're going to have to wait till at least half the panel to find out. So, and Gretchen, how did you, any Lovecraft in comics that you want to use for your intro part there?
I mean, for me, kind of like you, I saw like the Batman one where you saw the cockroaches coming out of his mother's mouth, and it was terribly traumatizing. But it was connected to Dave McCain's art, and that's who I kind of had the introduction. And then there was some Hellblazer stuff that every once in a while you find like a Lovecraftian bent.
Yeah, for me it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue 29 of the Mirage Comics run, the old black and white stuff. And they were in Arkham, Massachusetts, and there was vampires and the cult of the Esoteric Order of Dagon and all kinds of tentacly monsters. And I was like, this is so awesome. How come more people don't put this stuff into their comics? Because I knew about the Cthulhu Mythos, and it's like, it was so weird to see it in Ninja Turtle comics. It's like, come on, time travel's cool, and this is that, and this other stuff, and all this other wacky things, but to have the Cthulhu Mythos in it just seemed like amazing. It was groundbreaking for me. Mm-hmm. I started looking for more stuff with the Cthulhu Mythos in it in comic books, and thankfully Hellboy came along, so. Yeah. So what else you got there, Dave?
So I just found something out a couple days ago, and I wanted to bring it up. Just in July, the Great Race of Heath made its first appearance in Marvel 616. And if you guys aren't aware of what that is, that's the actual main universe which Iron Man and Spider-Man all lives. And it appeared in all things, and I don't follow this, but I'm going to go buy the stupid book because there's one panel with the Great Race of Heath, and that is Spider-Gwen in the Gwenverse, where there's a holographic appearance of the Great Race of Heath. It's marked as that. And so Marvel does this. They'll drop things and then 3 or 4 years later bring it up. So this is the first Yithians, and it came out in July, and I think we can just now get the graphic novel. But Marvel did that with with Abdul Alhazarad, where it first appeared in a Tarzan Marvel comic, but also in The Dweller in the Darkness, where it first appeared as a name in a Thor comic, and then appears actually as a villain in about 5 years later in a Thor comic. The first was in Thor. Then it first next appeared in Doctor Strange comics. So I'm looking forward to much more Yithians.
Yeah. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Well, I can't really speak for Marvel and DC canon because I'm kind of here as like the manga representative. I'm in a low league to say it. But there are times like I don't know if you're familiar with the term dojinoshi. It's a indie comics that generally like things are self-published and whatnot. Like Lovecraft shows up a lot in that.
All right.
In many different forms, like we're gonna say it, hentai. I mean, it's pretty simple. I actually even brought one with me. This one is the elder sister like one, and it's I guess I can break it down to like it's a hound of Tindalos that he found in his basement, and he has her call him, or she has him call her his sister, and there's a lot of tentacles involved. Just saying. But that's like, I mean, that is where you see commonly in like manga, like especially, unless it's like a story is centered that way, and you'll see it in anime oftentimes, like in the background, there'll be like a Necronomicon or a sculpture that you're like, oh, that's Cthulhu, that's gotta be Cthulhu.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so, very much so. Does anyone remember the name of the, I'm going to describe it, and then no one's going to know it, so I'm going to stop myself right there.
Do it.
Oh, it starts with a U. It's about, like, circles or rings.
Are you talking about Uzumaki?
Yes.
From Junji Ito?
Yeah.
I brought a couple of Junji Ito books with me.
Thank goodness. Yeah, no, and I was hoping maybe you could tell me more about it, because I like the visual effect. I mean, I like the visualizations, but I know nothing to where to start or where to go. It's
Well,
like,
I mean, Uzumaki has Lovecraftian aspects to it. I mean, I know it's not like a dissertation of Uzumaki, but
Yeah.
like these two books, this is Ramina and Censor, and these have like overt Lovecraftian like theme
Yeah.
by the fact that like Ramina is a planet that's coming to eat our planet.
sounds like,
Right.
sounds like Cosmic Horror to me.
And Censor is about this remote village that has a anomaly of a volcanic eruption where these little hairs of like volcanic glass plop on people's heads, and they call them like amagami or anagami, like angel hairs. And they use it as like a form of telepathy for amongst each other, and it's really like very like this is Lovecraft. Obviously.
Sure, yeah, that's...
Or mythos, at least.
Yeah, no, it's spooky cosmic horror, and I like it. So, Dave, what else do you got? I don't have anything.
Well, I talked about the Dweller of the
moderator.
Darkness. And the Dweller of the Darkness is the final monster in, I'm going to mispronounce it, the martial arts movie, Disney,
Shang-Chi.
Shang-Chi, yeah, thank you. So that is the Dweller of the Darkness. Dweller in the Darkness is also the name.
Is that really? Is that what, oh, wow, I
Yeah,
didn't even
it's
realize.
also the name of August Derleth's version of Nyarlathotep.
Yep.
And in fact, it is an entire book or a short story called The Dweller in the Darkness. And they threw the name out first into Marvel, like I said, for about 5 years. And then they kept building the character. And there's even this throwaway line where they say that he is the son of Cthulhu. And then the Marvel history, or the Marvel, where you look at the dictionary, the Marvel creatures, they change it to, well, he is sort of a spiritual successor of Cthulhu, because Marvel's got their own elder gods. They've got
Sure.
Cthulhu and this. And a lot of that, I think, is because a lot of this developed in the 70s. And August Derleth was threatening to sue people.
Yeah.
He claimed, whether right or wrong, that he had the copyright to the Cthulhu Mythos. And so I
He's
think
a
they waited
demigod.
until he died. And then they brought up the Dweller in the Darkness. And he is, not only that, he's one of the bad guys in the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy video game. And he looks more like Cthulhu. but in complete comic style, he decided he didn't need his body. So he got rid of his body and got like a robot body. And so the same thing like Lex Luthor would do. So they really sort of comic booked him out, if that's a descriptive word.
Okay.
But he was the name came, he was based on August Derleth's story. And I think that's something, especially the Bronze Age, which is the 70s on, the people who wrote these, they grew up on the pulps. A lot of them, Julius Schwartz was a pulp editor, and he became an editor for DC at that time. Even Stan Lee admits, he says, I borrowed from all these pulp stuff that I read in weird tales to create the X.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's. There's so many like Silver Age artists and writers that I feel really either got their start doing pulp stuff. There's some people I wish who were here because they would know exactly what I was talking about, but he isn't able to make it, so unfortunately Derek's not here. But it's amazing that it's like out of what happened with the horror comics in the 1950s, early 1950s, seduction of the innocents, comic books being put on trial for all sorts of things, and then the things being toned down a bit, which also meant that you had to bring in more science fiction elements, and you had to bring in like weird monsters because you couldn't do certain things in comic books anymore and have new types of enemies. And
Sullivan Grundy had to be a mutant. He couldn't be a zombie.
Couldn't be a zombie. You couldn't have vampires, but you could have things that were like vampires.
And it lessened up a little bit where you could have characters from classical horror or classical literature. Yeah. So that's the way they got Dracula in, and if they had Dracula, they could bring in other vampires.
But yeah, you start getting in the 60s, these space monsters. I mean, like Groot comes from that tradition of Marvel space monsters and like the Fantastic Four or someone else having to defeat them. But
and so back to sort of the original sort of horror comics, Cthulhu first comes up in a I think it was Erie, but I'm not sure, called Have I Got a Donut for You? And that was the first mention of Cthulhu in comics.
That's amazing. That's
in case
amazing.
you get that question on Trivial Pursuit.
Do we know the first reference of the Necronomicon in comics?
I have it in my notes. I will look for it for you. But go on, I'll bring it up.
Well, yeah, no. I know we've discussed this at some point in time, but because then it was going to lead into the story of how Arkham got its name.
Yeah. So like I said, I was really surprised that Arkham was associated with Batman when I first came. And I knew enough that Arkham was actually not, Arkham Sanitarium was not created by Lovecraft, but Robert E. Howard. And he wrote that as a dedication to his friend in the Blackstone, where he needed a place to put somebody in a mental institution. And so as an homage to his friend Lovecraft, he created Arkham Sanitarium. Lovecraft was so delighted that he uses it at the thing in the doorstep. And so there's got to be a connection. I mean, it just didn't seem that there couldn't be. So my go-to in the time when I started looking this up was Comic Vine. And Comic Vine goes in and it says that it first appeared in a 1972 Batman comic, The Curse of the Two-Headed Coin, written by Denny O'Neil. And then it says, we do not know if there is a connection between Lovecraft and Arkham Asylum. There has to be. Comic Vine, take my word for it, there has to be. So about, I want to say 4 or 5 years, but it's probably more because apparently, I just want to say COVID was only 1 year. But Denny O'Neil came here to Wizard World. And so he was in a panel opposite of William Shatner. So I'm fighting my way through all these Trekkies that are trying to go up the convention stairs so I can get to talk to Denny O'Neil. And I have this one question for him. It was, where did Arkam Asylum go? And unfortunately, we lost him a couple years ago. For those that don't know, he is credited for creating the Bronze Age of comics. He gets this idea that, hey, we ought to address social issues in comics. So he takes Green Lantern and Green Arrow, two people who have nothing to do with each other except for the fact they have the name Green in their name, throws them in a truck and drives them through 1970s America where they address every social issue. And he basically changed comics. Stan Lee says the only mistake I ever made in comics was let Denny O'Neil go. Denny O'Neil says, gee, I remember you firing me. But so he goes on, and at the end I ask him, I go, was there a connection? Why did you guys choose Arkam? And at this time he was older, he wasn't feeling that well. And when he asked that question, he just sat up, and his face just lighted up. And he says, we were sitting around at a table. We knew we had to get this name for this mental hospital. And Jack C. Harris, one of the writers, he said, hey, I know what we're going to do. We're going to call it Arkam, after Lovecraft. And he said, that was our aha moment. He said, every one of us just slapped our forehead because it was sitting right there in front of us, and we didn't think of it. And then he went on for about 10 minutes about just how much he loved the pulps, how much the pulps, the comics were basically a continuation of the pulp that he grew up with. And it was just, I was just really grateful to hear him say that before he passed on. And just, I really did get this understanding that there's this history with not only Lovecraftian and weird horror, but pulp in the comics we read now.
Yeah. No, definitely. I agree, as I've agreed before. Anything else that everyone has? Gretchen?
Not to that subject.
I know, but you've got an iPad out, so I think you have something to say.
Oh, no, I'm just following the questions.
Okay.
I know we were going to talk about tropes, and so you want me to start off?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Like some Lovecraftian tropes that I've seen in manga in general, I kind of touched on that with anime. It was like saying that there are things like Necronomicon, the tentacles, so many retellings of the Dunwich horror, so many, and then a space entity coming to eat us. Also they tend to use like Lovecraftian character names, but without any basis as to what they actually were, or to the story's basis. Basically, they're just names, so they're using them as spiritual names, or like American names or Egyptian names.
Hi everyone, I'm Zothamog. How are you doing?
Right, exactly. But you'll see the character will be talking about being a prince, but will be his name is Narthalatep. You're like, what the heck? Why is this character named this? Well, I don't know, but it's a common trope in that type of thing. How about for you?
We see this a little bit, and especially of the writings of Joe Hill. And in case you guys don't necessarily know this, Joe Hill is actually Joe King, Stephen King's son, but no one would take him serious as Joe King. But so you have in Lock and Key, you have Lovecraft is the name of the county.
Right.
In Plunge, the name of the boat that sinks is the Derelith. He throws out Lock and Key, he throws out, these are the creatures from Lang. And he does take them as terms, and he honors them, but there's not necessarily...
The world comes with it.
Yeah,
the universe that comes with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's reinventing it, but he's using familiar terms.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Lovecraftian tropes that I really like, that I've seen in the past in, your standard corner store comics, your Marvels and your DCs, has always been kind of like extraplanar space opening up and tentacles coming out.
Absolutely, tentacles. It's a theme.
Tentacles coming out, just like, all right, let's have some stuff just come out of the sky. or one eye and tentacles, whether it be Starro or the one that I always have to ask you to say.
Me?
No, Dave. The one-eyed guy with all the tentacles from the Marvel universe.
Deer in the head. You can have
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. I think normally we have like computers in front of us, but yeah, he's in Marvel versus Street Fighter, Capcom. Anyway, or I'm not. Anyway, are we ready for Q&A, or do we have more stuff?
I'm going to say even we get that in The Watchmen.
Yeah.
When
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they create the squid monster, and they got rid of that in the movie, of course.
Yeah.
But it was enough of a trope,
But they
and
brought it back for
absolutely,
HBO.
if you're going to, this is, it loves Lovecraft, and I can't believe I just blanked now. You've frozen my mind. Who wrote The Watchmen?
Oh, Alan Moore.
Alan Moore. Alan Moore has these incredible comics
Mhm.
called The Fungi from Yugoth, and other, and just amazing. And we see so many Lovecraftian tropes in Alan Moore's
Oh
writings.
gosh,
Oh,
I didn't even
certainly.
think about fungi. Like,
Yeah.
it's a whole other thing.
Yeah. No. Alan Moore, I think, is one of those people who I think does the Cthulhu mythos in a way that not only is available to a lot of people, but really kind of like, I don't know, he has something wrong with his brain that makes it so that he can like translate it well.
And we see that
Well.
in the Courtyard.
Yes.
The Courtyard and Providence and Necronomicon. And again, not to spoil too much, Courtyard started out as a short story and then was turned into a comic.
Yeah.
And where Aklo, the language, is basically sold as drugs in New York City.
Okay.
Where people become addicted to this language that Lovecraft created.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a good one to write down for future reference if you haven't checked it out already. One that I want to recommend to people, DC comic, and if people haven't read it, check it out. Doom that came to Arkham, I believe it is.
Yeah, the Doom that came to Arkham,
Yeah.
which they just announced in San Diego Comic-Con, is going to be an animated series coming out next year. Unless they've done it in the last month, I don't think they've announced the voice actors yet.
Yeah, but it's very kind of, oh man, I want to say it's At the Mountains of Madness, very related to that, and some other aspects of the Cthulhu mythos, blended in with everyone's back history from Batman's Rogues Gallery, and it's set in what, the late 1890s? Is it still kind of gaslight, or is it
More the
closer to
20s,
the
more the
20s?
20s.
Okay.
And that's Mike Mignola.
Yep. Yep.
Helly.
Yeah, and oh man, there's someone who would be good for this panel, but I couldn't get in touch with him this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, no.
And definitely Hellboy. Even the movie starts with a quote from a book made up by Robert E. Howard. It's definitely Lovecraftian influence.
Yeah. No, it's probably one of the most Lovecraftian, non-Lovecraftian books that's out there. Just like with how the monsters are, where the monsters come from, kind of stuff. It's just very Lovecraftian, but it also has a cool little satanic twinge to it, which some people find really fun, like myself. But yeah. Want to open up the floor?
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but the lights are so bright you may have to yell out. I'm not sure
Yeah.
we'll be able to see you.
Anyone have any questions or anything they want to comment on?
No.
You back there. Thank you. I was like, it's not that. It's that's a Lovecraftian thing already. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Any comments? Any favorite Lovecraftian entities that someone? Yeah. Oh, I gotta check that out. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Yeah, definitely. I have ran across some underground comics that have like just kind of like a occulty kind of mythosy thing, but never like hardcore Cthulhu mythos. But yeah, I want to check that stuff out.
And it became, of course, mainstream But Heavy Metal did an entire episode or an entire issue on Lovecraft.
That's awesome.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, no. I used to mispronounce Cthulhu and ask the guy who worked at the comic book store, is there anything that he could recommend if I like this stuff? And he'd be like, oh yeah, check this out, check that out. Hellboy, I've got Hellboy Zippo lighters, I've got a Hellboy lunchbox. And I'm like 17 being like, yeah, someone sell me a lighter.
I can recommend a few things. Or there's a few comics if anybody's interested in like the indie comics I was talking about earlier. There's one called Lovecraft Girls or How to Prevent the Apocalypse. It is glorious. And it's on YouTube. It's actually like a motion comic, and they have it dubbed in English. Or there's a English dub, and then there's English subs. But it's more like they're just showing panels of the manga, and it's about like Narthlatep and Hastur and Cthulhu. They're sisters, and Narthlatep's like the mayor of I think it's like Arkam Town or something like that. It's so absurd, but really, really fun to watch, read.
Very cool.
And After God is a masterpiece on that you should check out if you get an opportunity.
Very
The
cool.
one I want to sort of throw out too that you don't really think of much, but Brian K. Vaughan's Paper Girls.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
the TV
That's
show,
great.
but
No, that's
the
a great comic, yeah.
But they have these creatures called the Etorex,
Yeah.
which is the creatures from the fourth dimension. They look like Shaggoths in like cones or rectangles, and they're very Lovecraftian. If they touch you, they don't really acknowledge it. People, they think they're on the side, but they don't know. And if you touch it, you have these flashbacks or flash future, and you don't control it. So one person has to come to with her sexuality, that she's going to basically kiss another girl in the near future. Another character realizes that she spent so much time playing video games, and these creatures don't care what vision they give you, but it's just, if you're a human being, you can't handle it. It's not our fault.
Wow. I have to check that out too. Does anyone have any recommendations of comic books that we haven't covered that you think we should check out? You think other people should check out? Yes.
Yeah. From what I read, there was in 1958, there was it wasn't a manga, but it was the first publishing of Lovecraft's work and in like a scary tales type thing. And as far as like first artists, nobody's really come forward as first artists, but I can say that guy, his work has been the most prolific in actually showing the Lovecraft stories, but mangaka style. So it's all the artwork is more modern, but it's stunning. But they're actually using like the Lovecraft stories.
Is that the Mountains of Madness?
No, this one is the Hound,
Oh.
but there are the Mountains of Madness. There's
It's
a
beautiful.
huge bevy of work. He's prolific, and as far as like Dark Horse has done all of his stuff for translation. Easy to find stuff.
But
thank you, good question.
Lovecraft, on a larger scale, was introduced into Japan in the 1940s by U.S. soldiers due to the fact that they were, like paperback books that they were given, and Armed Forces Radio even did like the Dunwich Horror, but that may have been a little bit later, but it still would have been while U.S. soldiers were in Japan.
It was called
Same
like
way they do with
Yeah.
France.
it's called the Seikai Kyofu Shosetsu Zenshu. Excuse me, my Japanese is childish.
No, just the same thing with France, and we're going to find artists like Moebius are going to be very influenced because basically soldiers left Arkham House copies of soldier copies of Lovecraft's work, and including the two guys who wrote The Morning of the Magician. So they wrote actually fanzines for Lovecraft. So Lovecraft really to post-war France who was going through this regrowth period in the same way as Japan. You back there?
Yeah.
No problem.
Oh, no, we just talked about Ramina and Censor and kind of like how a few of his themes have been, like Uzumaki has like Lovecraftian kind of overtones, but not specific, that kind of thing. Any other questions? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that story.
See, that's what I want to see, that I haven't seen in mangaka yet, as far as like Lovecraftian stuff, is seeing the Dreamlands works. Because I feel like that's so open and so vast and gigantic. It's just a matter of seeing that market get tapped.
I'd personally love to see a lot of Clark Ashton Smith adapted to comic books, the Seven Geas especially. Any more hands? I thought I saw something. No.
So do we have a moment?
This guy over here.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. I feel like Mike Mignola I've definitely seen the word cyclopean a few times in Hellboy.
I read an article recently about that, talking about like how Cthulhu like is kind of a play on like a word. It's like Cthulhu, and so it's they like it because it sounds really cute, and so a lot of times you'll see a lot of Cthulhu is like really cute and stuff because the way the name enunciates, it's like oh Cthulhu, but they'll use like fake. I saw like a anime or an anime recently that had like something like that. The language was all ia, and then but they were saying something else in Japanese, and I was all, what is this translation?
Oh yeah.
And I would say almost you see a little bit of it in Roy Thomas's Conan run. That he tries very hard to get Robert E. Howard, but he hadn't read Howard or Lovecraft until Stanley gave him this. So I think when I read it, I see he does take a little bit of Lovecraftian from that. In fact, we see, the wizards riding night gaunts, which look like giant bat dragons, not like what, Lovecraft described. But I think every once in a while in those sort of square areas, I think he copies that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think names have been stolen.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Alan Moore has used some names for sure. Lovecraft in comics.
The only other place I really see served that is where people do retellings of the story and they use the original words and then put their pictures.
Yeah, that's what I was saying with this guy's work is like that's his kind of style. Is that it's
definitely.
just a new telling, but not a retelling.
And going back to Augie Dog Derleth and his litigious nature, I'm still mad about the fact that deities and demigods for Dungeons and Dragons, didn't all get the Cthulhu Mythos in it for its whole run, just the first bit, anyway.
Didn't they try to copyright Cthulhu's name?
Yeah, Arkham House, it's like with permission from Arkham House, but yeah. Or without permission by Arkham House. No, it's Call of Cthulhu that has permission by Arkham House in the older editions. But yeah, I don't think deities and demigods had that. But that's not comics and the Cthulhu Mythos or Cosmic Horror. All right. What else did we have?
So another place where we see Lovecraft is, in all places, Archie comics. With the,
Archie
the
Afterlife.
Yes,
Yes.
Archie Afterlife, where Sabrina, meets Lovecraft.
Well, and she uses the Necronomicon, or doesn't she, to bring Jughead's dog back to life?
Yes, and Cthulhu tries to get her to marry, But there's even some more hidden stuff that actually was, if you see the TV show, they meet a cult that follows the great god Pan.
Oh.
And then they have the psychocons, which literally means,
Yeah.
a written representation of death. And Lovecraft wrote a poem called Psychocon. But in, the Archie comics, they're whippoorwills. Or they take the form of whippoorwills, which is the psychocomp that Lovecraft used in
Dunwich Horror.
Dunwich Horror. Thank you. It's the lights. The lights are affecting my brain. So I think that's one of the great ones. Is the new Sabrina and the new.
I didn't even think about that. Honestly,
I was
love
confused
those.
because I was like, the show with the talking cat has that?
Yes.
I mean, he is a minion of somebody.
That cat is a Mask of Nyarlathotep. I didn't,
That's what
talking
his
cat.
other face is. He's a dweller in the dark. He just didn't know. But yeah, I didn't know that Sabrina was like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously the easy stuff, which is like she used was it the Necronomicon or the Book of the Dead or something like that, right? Or is the Necronomicon the Book of the Dead? Is it?
Depends
So
on
it
who's
depends
writing. Depends on who's writing.
And it depends on who's translating.
Yeah.
Lovecraft said it was the book speaking of the dead, but other people say, your Latin sucks. It really translates into the Book of Dead.
Dead names or the book of this.
okay.
Yeah. There's been so many arguments about that here that I've witnessed
Yeah.
between game designers. Ken Hite and Scott Glancy almost came to blows over it. No, I'm kidding. Okay.
And, another thing I was just sort of made throw, I don't know how much more time we've got.
I don't know either. I'm waiting until the next panel shows up, like with what happened with us. And I'm on the next panel.
We're on the next panel, so we'll just start. We'll just change the topic. Okay.
Okay,
cool.
So one is that how I think that Lovecraft is making it into the movies and the TV shows. And one way, I think, my favorite part of the Aquaman movie is that, his father had on his desk, one of the Lovecraft Chaosium.
He did.
Yeah, Chaosium books. And, James Wan, who directed it, he deliberately did that on purpose.
Really?
He says, as a person of color growing up, I loved Lovecraft, but I could not stand, some of his views on race. And he says, I'm taking it back now. I'm taking the stuff that I love and I'm putting it out there. In the first season of Gotham, they had a mob boss named Dick Lovecraft. And he doesn't last, spoilers, he doesn't last that long. He doesn't make it through the full season. But, and so I looked very carefully, and several people, that was something that they created for the show. It wasn't something that had existed before in the comics.
Huh.
Because, like I said, so many people who write comics, they come from this love of the pulp. They have this love of Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And this is, and I think, hopefully, not to spoil things because you want to stay for our next panel. This is the time for independent creators, comic book writers, video game writers, board game, role-playing. This is this time for these independent writers who all grew up on Lovecraft and who make these things now because technology allows them to use small press.
Yeah.
And where we would not get them and the volume that we've gotten them in the past because they're labors of love. And, O'Neill said it, Julia Schwartz said, I did these things in these homages because I loved it. But now more people can. And so we're going to see a lot more independent comics, I think.
Yeah, Julie Schwartz also complained about how they made no money doing any of it, and comic artists these days, they don't know how good. That was back in the 80s, but
Yeah. So I think we're going to see actually more.
I mean,
Yeah.
we are. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, the market's so different and so vast, and I mean, everything, even from my perspective, looking at manga, it's endless. There are still continuing series, and lots of independent publishing. And it's
Stuff's
just not
showing
very
up for kids now
right.
and
Absolutely,
stuff like that, and it's
very
like a
kawaii style Cthulhu stuff.
Yeah.
really broad market. It's like if you want to make it, it's out there to be made. It's public domain. Some of it, most of it, a lot of Lovecraft stuff. There's like what's not public domain currently.
So, and this may have changed, but this is according to the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society. No, because it
Okay.
changes
Yeah.
each year. The only thing they said that was still under public domain was what he wrote with C.M. Eddy.
Okay.
And honestly, who wants to see a comic book of the beloved dead? Well, maybe I
Some
would
people
actually.
might, some people might.
But so, and this may change because as we go farther past his passing, and C.M. Eddy's son, actually did go out, keep his stuff going. It may now be public domain now. I'm not a lawyer, don't trust me, but according to the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, yes, that only the stuff with C.M. Eddy was not public domain.
So get out there and make some comics.
And I think that's it.
And read comics.
And read comics, right?
And that's the other thing is that there is a market.
Yeah.
There is a built-in market for people who will buy these comics because they've got Lovecraft or mythos in it.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice, and it's so easy to find these. It's not so easy to find these comics, but it's nice when you find these comics, and it's so easy to appreciate a lot of them. Just see the names that you love of your favorite monsters and mad scientists and sad boy investigators who faint. And yeah.
And a lot of also just, if you go in, I mean, Amazon, and I'm not necessarily supporting Amazon, but you just, Lovecraft comic translations, there's like 30 or 40 just right now that you could get within 7 days.
Yeah. Any questions? Any more questions? Can't see anything.
Right, yeah.
So I'm going to pretend no. All right. Oh. Okay. In Lovecraft's writings to other writers and such, I have never ran across anything of Lovecraft. I know that he thought that movies were kind of terrible.
And the first comic
Sounds
for our
unfun.
newspapers, I think, is The Yellow Kid.
Yeah.
So there would be a few, but I don't think, I've never seen anything where him saying an opinion. And he dies, ironically, the same year Batman and Superman
Mm-hmm.
start becoming a thing. And I think that if he thought he could have made money off of it, he would have thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I don't think he ever, I think he would see it kind of as juvenile, but I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm always curious, like, what Lovecraft would have thought about, like, role-playing games or comic books or
Oh,
video
creative,
games
probably.
or just been, like, just mad, just, like, you know, they just, like, you do a couple of horror books and they just pigeonhole you and you can't get out of it in this industry. But
But I think he would have loved the internet.
Oh.
From his, you know, his letters basically invented were a non-electronic, you know, internet.
yeah, yeah, and there's cat pictures everywhere.
Yes.
All
So,
right.
did you want to say who we are?
Oh, yeah. We are David Heath and DB Spitzer. David Heath, also known as Farmer Dave. We host a weekly show about the Cthulhu Mythos, where we also talk about Dungeons and Dragons at the end of it, or at least that's what we're doing this season and probably next season. And we have gone through the alphabet with the Cthulhu Mythos.
We're stuck on N.
We're in Nyarlathotep's masks for August, until August, I think, maybe. Until the next season. And and you can check us out anywhere you find podcasts. PGTTCM, People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Gretchen, you got any projects going on these days?
I've just been kind of guest hosting on like different podcasts. Like if you like
That's cool.
tap me for kaiju stuff, that's my nerd specific.
That's awesome.
But I'm Gretchen is Weird on Instagram if you're looking for it. But yeah, no, I mean other than that.
Cool. And Dave, any side projects going on for you right now?
Not that don't involve goat milk, but
Okay.
I can't talk about that.
Yeah. And yeah, all my side projects.
I'm excited about my soap, just
Yeah.
saying.
Cool T-shirts, like old skate shirts and stuff like that with Cthulhu Mythos jokes on them now. I don't know, stuff like that. You can find all that at pgttcm.com and the links to the store. It helps the show and makes it so that I can print out business cards and buttons and stickers for free, which I don't have any buttons or stickers, but they are at the Kickstarter. And if you haven't gotten your poster, if you had a Kickstarter and you need a poster, the posters are at the Kickstarter. We don't have the camp shirts or the women's shirts or anything larger than XL. And that's my official Kickstarter announcement that I was supposed to do at the beginning.
Nicely done.
Yes.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank
for
you,
attending.
everyone, for
Yeah.
coming out. And
Thank you.
comic books are awesome. Excelsior.